She spilled wine on his only suit. The single dad's calm reply made the CEO cry. The wine hit him like a slap. A full glass of Cabernet tipped down the front of his suit, blooming dark across the lapel before he could even step back. "Oh," Camille Lockhart said, not bothering to sound sorry. She looked him up and down, the off-the-rack jacket, the scuffed shoes, the little girl holding his hand. "I didn't see you there." Then again, a pause, perfectly timed for the people beside her. Who would? Grant Whitman laughed first. He always did. A few of the guests near the champagne tower turned to watch, the way people slow down for a car wreck. The stain spread across the only good suit Daniel Cole owned. The brown one, the one he'd worn to marry his wife, and 3 years later, to bury her. His daughter Sophie, 9 years old, looked up at him with her whole face crumpling. She'd worn her best dress for tonight. She'd practiced what she would say when they called her name. Daniel didn't raise his voice. He didn't curse. He crouched down, eye level with his daughter, and what he said next was so quiet that Camille had to lean in to hear it. And what none of them knew, not Camille, not Grant, not the 200 executives sipping their drinks under the chandeliers, was that those few calm words were about to end 3 careers. That by midnight, Camille Lockhart would be escorted out of the building she'd worked 10 years to rule. And that Vivian Cross, the CEO whose name made grown men straighten their ties, the woman no one in that company had ever seen show a single crack, would be standing at the microphone in front of all of them, crying. 9 hours earlier, Daniel Cole pressed that same brown suit flat on his kitchen counter with a travel iron, and he had no idea any of it was coming. The apartment was small and clean and cold in the early light. Daniel ironed by the window so he wouldn't wake Sophie, smoothing the lapels with the side of his hand the way his wife used to. Maria had bought him this suit 16 years ago, on a salesman's discount, telling him he looked like a man going places. He'd never gone anywhere, really, but the suit had been with him for all of it. He set out 2 bowls, counted the coffee scoops, because the can was nearly empty and payday was Friday. On the fridge, held up by a magnet shaped like a paintbrush, was the letter. Heavy cream paper, gold lettering. The Cross Foundation is honored to invite Sophie Cole, recipient of this year's Young Artists Prize, and her family to our annual gala. His daughter, a real artist, picked out of 4,000 kids across the state. Is it today? Sophie appeared in the doorway, hair a mess, clutching the stuffed rabbit she'd had since she was 3. Is it tonight? It's tonight, Bug. Are you wearing the brown suit? I'm wearing the brown suit. She grinned like he'd promised her the moon. Daniel worked nights and weekends as a custodian at Lincoln Elementary, the same school where Sophie went, which she thought was the best thing in the world and he prayed she'd never feel embarrassed by. Before Maria got sick, he'd been 2 semesters from his teaching license. Then there were hospital bills, and there was a little girl who needed someone home, and somewhere in there the license became a thing that happened to other people. He didn't talk about that. There was no point. Hard times are liars, Maria used to say, near the end when she could barely sit up. They tell you it's over. It never is. You hold on for the people who need you. He'd said it to himself 10,000 times since. He said a version of it to Sophie now, every time the world got small. He had no idea those 4 words, hard times are liars, were about to leave a room full of millionaires unable to breathe. After breakfast, Sophie spread her supplies across the kitchen table and added one last touch to the painting she was bringing tonight. It was the one that had won. A man in a brown suit, holding a little girl's hand, both of them small under a huge dark sky. At the bottom, in careful 9-year-old letters, she'd written the title, My Dad. Hard times are liars, Daniel looked at it for a long moment and had to turn back to the dishes so she wouldn't see his face. That painting was already at the gala, framed and displayed near the entrance with the other winners. When Daniel and Sophie walked into the Hartwell Hotel ballroom that evening, him in his pressed brown suit, her in her good dress, and her one nice pair of shoes, they stopped in front of it together, and Sophie squeezed his hand so hard it almost hurt. Across the marble lobby, a woman in a charcoal gown went very still when she saw the painting. She set down her glass. She took one step toward it. Then an assistant touched her elbow, murmured something about the program running late, and she was swept toward the stage. She looked back once. Daniel didn't notice. He should have. The ballroom was a different planet. Crystal chandeliers the size of cars, waiters in white gloves. 200 people who all seemed to know each other, wearing watches that cost more than Daniel made in a year. He felt the brown suit go shabby on his shoulders the second he stepped inside. A woman in a silver dress pressed her empty glass into his hand, without looking at him. Another sparkling water. No lime this time. I don't work here, Daniel said gently. She blinked, took her glass back, and walked off without a word, as if the mistake had been his. Sophie tugged his sleeve. Why did she think you work here? Because I look like someone who gets things done, Daniel said, and made his eyes go crossed until she laughed. They found their table. 41, tucked behind a pillar at the very back, beside the swinging doors to the kitchen, where the air smelled like steam and the clatter never quite stopped. Every other table sat under the light. Theirs sat in the shadow of a column, the one seat in 200 where you couldn't see the stage. That was where Camille Lockhart first noticed him. She was the foundation's chief brand officer, the woman who decided what the company's generosity should look like, and she had built her whole life on knowing who belonged and who didn't. She drifted past table 41 with Grant Whitman at her shoulder, and her gaze moved over Daniel's suit, his daughter, the empty seats around them, and something in her face curdled into amusement. "Oh, this is the community table," she said, loud enough to carry. "How authentic. They like us to have one," Grant snorted. "Makes the photos warmer," Sophie heard. Daniel watched her hear it. He watched her decide it must mean something bad, and then try to make herself smaller in her chair. And that, not the wine, not the table, none of it, was the only thing all night that made his jaw go tight. He leaned over to her. "You know what authentic means?" "No. It means real. It means we're the realest people in this whole room." He tapped her painting where it leaned against the table leg. "And the most talented. By a lot." She almost smiled. What Camille Lockhart didn't know, what she'd find out far too publicly, in under an hour, was that the woman whose approval she'd spent a decade chasing was about to watch every cruel thing she did tonight. And remember all of it. The lights dimmed for dinner. A man in a tuxedo took the stage to talk about impact and legacy, and the children whose lives the foundation touched, and the room applauded itself warmly between courses. Daniel and Sophie ate quietly behind their pillar. She showed him the napkin swan she'd folded. He told her about the time he and her mother had eaten gas station sandwiches on the hood of a borrowed car and called it the best dinner of their lives. She liked that story. She always asked for it. For a few minutes, behind the column, it was almost nice. Then Camille came back, and this time she brought a crowd. She had a fresh glass of red in her hand and 3 colleagues trailing behind her. The way important people travel. And she stopped at table 41 as though she'd discovered something charming. "I just had to come say hello," she said, smiling. "We're all so moved by your daughter's little drawing." "Tell me," she turned to Sophie. Voice gone sweet and slow. The voice adults use when they think a child can't hear the knife in it. Did your daddy help you with it? Or is it really all you? It's all me, Sophie said quietly. Adorable, Camille straightened. To Grant, not bothering to lower her voice, imagine framing something like that. You'd think they'd be embarrassed. Daniel stood up. He didn't loom. He wasn't that kind of man. He just stood, slow and calm, and the simple fact of his full height made Camille take half a step back, and her wine glass tipped, and the Cabernet went straight down the front of his only suit. For 1 second, no one moved. Then Camille recovered, and instead of an apology, she found contempt. Because contempt was easier than being clumsy in front of people. "Oh," she said, looking at the spreading stain like it was his fault. "Well, it's not as if it was a nice suit." She handed her empty glass to Grant. "Send me the dry cleaning bill. I'm sure it's not much." Grant laughed. A few people at the next table laughed too, uncertainly, the way crowds do. And Sophie looked up at her father's ruined suit, the suit she'd painted, the suit her whole world was wrapped in, and her face came apart. This was the moment, the one the whole night had been bending toward. Daniel didn't look at Camille. He crouched down in front of his daughter, right there on the floor of the ballroom in his stained brown suit, took both her small hands, and spoke in a voice that wasn't angry at all. "Hey, look at me. It's just a suit, Soph, but it's the brown one, I know. I know it is." He smoothed her hair back. "And it's been through a lot worse than a little wine. This suit went to my wedding. It held me up at the hardest day of my life. You think it's scared of a spilled drink?" She gave a wet, hiccuping laugh. "Hard times are liars, remember? They want us to think it's the end of the world. It's not. It's a Tuesday with a stain on it. We've been through worse, you and me. We'll be fine." He said it the way he'd said it 10,000 times. Quiet, certain, like a fact. And he had no idea that across the ballroom, a woman in a charcoal gown had stopped halfway up the steps to the stage. She'd been about to give a speech. Vivian Cross had given 1,000 of them. She was 52 years old, and she had built Cross Industries out of nothing, out of less than nothing, and in 28 years no employee had ever once seen her flustered. She was famous for it. People called her the Glacier, half in fear and half in awe, and she had never minded the name, but she had stopped on the steps. Because 4 words had floated to her across 200 tables, under the clatter and the laughter, and they had reached into a part of her she kept locked. Hard times are liars. She turned toward the back of the room. Toward the pillar. Toward the man on the floor in the wine-stained brown suit, holding his daughter's hands, and she was 24 years old again. It had been raining the night her whole life ended. The first time. She'd lost the job. Then the apartment. She was standing under the awning of a bus station, with everything she owned in 2 bags and her baby son asleep against her chest. And she had no ticket, and nowhere the bus could take her, even if she did. And she had, genuinely, quietly, decided she was done, that she could not do it anymore. A man had sat down on the bench beside her. A stranger in a worn brown suit, coming home from some long shift. He hadn't lectured her. He hadn't asked what was wrong. He'd bought 2 coffees from the machine and handed her one and let her cry without making it a thing. Then, he'd paid for her ticket, pressed $40 into her hand, and refused to take it back. Put his own coat around her shoulders because she was shaking. And right before her bus came, he'd said one thing. The only thing she remembered word for word from the worst night of her life. Hard times are liars. They tell you it's over. It never is. You hold on for the people who need you. She'd never gotten his name. She'd looked for him for years, when she had money, when she could afford to look. She'd built a foundation that gave away millions partly because of one man on one bench who'd had almost nothing and given her everything anyway. And now he was on the floor of her gala, and her own people had spilled wine on him and laughed. Vivian Cross came down the steps. The room felt the change before it understood it. The CEO had stepped off the stage and was walking, fast, toward the back, and a hush spread out ahead of her like a wave. Camille turned, and her face lit up. Surely Vivian had come to handle this, to back her up, to be on the right side of the room. "Vivian," Camille said brightly. "I'm so sorry about the disturbance, this gentleman. Be quiet." Camille's mouth closed. Vivian Cross walked past her as if she were furniture. She stopped in front of Daniel, who had risen to his feet, the stain dark down his front, his daughter pressed against his side. Up close, 28 years older, grayer, more tired. But it was him. It was the bench and the coat and the coffee. It was him. "Say it again," Vivian said. Her voice was not steady. Nobody in that company had ever heard it not be steady. "What you just said to her." "Please," Daniel blinked, confused, aware of 200 people staring. I told her hard times are liars. It's something my wife used to." He stopped. Because the most powerful woman in the room had put a hand over her mouth, and her eyes had filled, and the tears were running down her face faster than she could stop them, smearing the careful makeup, and she was not trying to hide it at all. "It was you," she whispered. 28 years ago. The bus station on Halsted. You gave me your coat. You gave me $40 you clearly couldn't spare." Her voice broke completely. "You told me to hold on for the people who needed me. I had a baby and no future, and I was going to, and you sat down next to me. And it was you." The room was dead silent now. Even the kitchen had gone quiet. Camille Lockhart stood frozen, the empty wineglass still in Grant's hand, 200 faces turning slowly from her, to the crying CEO, to the man in the stained brown suit. Daniel stared at her, and then, slowly, something moved behind his eyes. A rainy night. A young woman with a baby so scared, so far gone, that he'd sat with her until the bus came because he'd been afraid to leave her alone. "You had a little boy," he said softly. "He was asleep. You kept checking he was still breathing." Vivian made a sound that was half sob and half laugh. "His name is Adam. He's a doctor now. He has children." She wiped her face with the back of her hand, ruining it further, not caring. "Because of you. All of it because of you. And you've been." She looked at the suit, the table behind the pillar, the daughter, the worn shoes. "You've been back here. And I let my own people." She couldn't finish. She turned, slowly, and looked at Camille Lockhart. But Vivian Cross wasn't finished, not even close. What she did over the next 90 seconds would empty Camille's office by morning, end a career a decade in the building, and turn a back-cornered table into the only one anyone would remember. When Vivian spoke again, her voice had stopped shaking. That was somehow worse. She walked to the stage, climbed the steps, and took the microphone she'd been about to use for a speech about legacy. 200 people watched their unflappable CEO stand there with mascara streaked down her face and make no move to fix it. 28 years ago, she said. I was going to give up. I won't dress it up for you. I had a baby in 2 trash bags and no reason left to keep standing. And a stranger in a brown suit, a man with almost nothing, spent what little he had to put me on a bus and tell me to hold on. She found Daniel in the dark at the back of her own ballroom. I built this entire company trying to become the kind of person who would do what that man did, and tonight I learned that he has been sitting at the worst table in this room, and that someone who works for me poured wine on him and called his suit cheap and laughed. She let that sit. You could hear people breathing. Camille, Vivian didn't raise her voice. You're done. Not just tonight. The Hartwell account, the brand division, all of it, it's reassigned. Effective now. Security will see you out. And every client who ever wondered what kind of person we put in charge of our values is going to hear exactly why you're gone. Camille opened her mouth. Vivian, it was an accident. If I had known who he... That's the whole problem, Vivian said. You needed to know who he was. The rest of us should treat a janitor and a king the same. He already does. That's the difference between him and you. And it's the difference I should have been hiring for all along. She turned to Grant, who had spent the evening laughing at every cruel thing Camille said, and was now trying very hard to become invisible. Grant, you found all of it so funny. Let's see how funny you find clearing out your desk. Her eyes swept the silent room. Anyone else who thinks the back table is for laughing at, the door's right there. The rest of you, I'd like you to stand up. Because we are going to give this little girl the prize she earned, properly, in the light, where she should have been all along. By Friday, the story had run everywhere. Not the cruel version, the true one. Camille Lockhart did not land softly. 3 firms she'd expected to flee to suddenly weren't hiring. The clients she'd managed asked pointedly to work with someone else. The version of her she had spent a decade building, flawless, untouchable, always at the right table, was gone. And what replaced it was a single sentence people now said about her at parties. She's the one who poured wine on the janitor. She'd built her whole life on who belonged where. In the end, the only place left for her was outside. Grant Whitman lasted 9 more days before he resigned to pursue other opportunities. The opportunities did not pursue him back. He learned, a little late, that the people you mock on your way up tend not to be there to catch you on the way down. Daniel never gloated. When a reporter asked him how it felt to see them lose everything, he looked uncomfortable. I don't feel good about anyone losing their job, he said. I just hope they think about it. That's all any of us can do. Think about it, and do better. Then he asked if they could please talk about Sophie's painting instead. 3 months later, Daniel Cole pressed a suit on his kitchen counter again. A new one. This time, charcoal gray, tailored. A gift he'd tried to refuse twice. The brown one hung in the closet. The wine stain faded to almost nothing after the best cleaner in the city had quietly worked on it for free. He'd keep it forever. Some things you don't retire. The apartment was the same size. But the coffee can was full, and there was a college fund now in Sophie's name. The foundation had created the scholarship the same week and named it after a stranger on a bench. The art program at Lincoln Elementary, the one that had been about to be cut, had a new wing coming. Daniel still worked there. He'd turned down a fancier title. I like knowing the kids, he'd said. I like fixing what's broken. Vivian had laughed and said that was exactly why she'd offered. She came by sometimes, the most feared woman in the state, to sit at their small kitchen table and let Sophie show her new paintings. Her son Adam came once, with his own kids, and shook Daniel's hand for a long time without quite being able to speak. On a Sunday in spring, the 2 of them stood in the doorway of Sophie's room and watched her paint at a real easel, in real light, humming to herself. You know you saved my life, Vivian said quietly. Daniel thought about it, about the bench, the rain, the brown suit, his wife's voice, all the hard times that had turned out to be liars after all. You held on, he said. I just sat with you till the bus came. He smiled. You did the rest. You always were going to. In the next room, Sophie called out that she'd finished, and the two of them went to see what she'd made.